Welcome back to Hot Takes and Deep Dives, and my next guest is the writer, director, and performer responsible for the seminal Broadway show and film Hedwig and the Angry Inch, the film Shortbus. He's also in his villain era, most recently in Shrill and playing Joe Exotic. Hi, John Cameron Mitchell. How are you?
Oh, good. I'm good.
Now, I must start off with, I was just at the monthly party that you host at Julius right here in the West Village called Mattachine. Let's start out with talking about the significance of Julius and about this monthly dance party that you host there and DJ for, I think, maybe at least 10 years.
Yeah, I started it with PJ Du Bois and Paul Dawson, who are the gay couple in Shortbus, and they're still together, actually. And then we quickly brought in Amber Martin, who's my concert partner when I go on tour. We just did 2 shows at Joe's Pub. And so we've been doing, Julius Bar is the oldest gay bar in New York, and was, about 15 years ago being threatened, as many places were in the village, with closing. And so it was, by that point, a kind of old man, gay man bar, which was our neighborhood bar, and we loved it. It's still got that 60s dive bar feeling. And so we started this club where we play a lot of old music, so we wanted the elders as well as the young people to both enjoy. All music is dance music, is our vibe, and it's quite small, but people have had some very sweaty good times there.
I mean, the irony is it's a dance party, and yet you're actually not allowed to dance at Julius.
Is that true?
Yeah, I think there's something that literally says no dancing.
Well, you can. There's definitely been nights where it's full on dancing in there. Yeah, there are these cabaret laws that from 100 years ago that Giuliani enforced because he just wanted complete control of anything that was out of control in the 90s and kind of fucked up New York in many ways. But there was a sense of anything can go in there, and that was also. There was Stonewall and Julius right near each other, and Stonewall was the crazier one that was more welcoming to everyone. Julius was a little more the buttoned up and a little more maybe closeted, kind of worker, type of thing. But we brought back a kind of vibe that is perhaps closer to what Stonewall was, in terms of the eclecticism of the music and, a lot of queer spaces. The dance music feels very formulaic and, it's the same damn beat all the time. And we're like, no, baby, there's all kinds of music, and specifically queer, rock and soul and funk and new wave and jazz and pop, whatever. Pop is a broader term than it is today, which feels like more of a formulaic genre of modern pop, which gets on my nerves because I don't feel a lot of humanity in there. It feels like a sugar high, which could be fun, but
there's no humanity in modern pop. Very few. There are some artists like Jessie Ware who are incredible, but the bulk of artists, like, I don't even want to name them. but
it's obvious there isn't, and it's just about. I'm not against for example, RuPaul's Drag Race. I think in some ways it's created opportunities for a lot of people to work, but it does when you have a competition like that, or when you sell things, you have to standardize them. You define what is drag, you define what is pop, and sometimes those get very narrow. So it's like American Idol, narrowed down what a good singer should be. They have to be able to scream things. They're not allowed to bring their own songs into the show. There's like a lot of weird things that come from capitalism in order to sell, because in effect, American Idol, they're buying these people.
What do you think makes a great party? Because you're throwing these parties. What do you think makes a great party people-wise?
A mixed party is always best, and mixed can mean a lot of things. Different types of music, different ages of people. I like a party with kids and old folks. I grew up in the military where everyone was from somewhere else, national origin, race, age. So when I do a party, I invite everyone, because someone's got something to add to it. Oh, that older gentleman and his older wife is dancing in a way I've never seen to this kind of music. Come on, kids, learn a little. The young people can learn from the old people to get off their fucking phones. We don't see a lot of phones at Julius because everyone's engaged. They're not wishing they were somewhere else or desperately trying to document the good time they're not really having. when we come to Julius and my parties, wherever we do Mattachine, we're doing a Mattachine in San Francisco. We're bringing our Julius vibe to a giant space, which can work. We had 2 shows this weekend at Joe's Pub. Amber's singing her new song, I Left My Weed in Texas and That Ain't Cool. And I'm lighting up a joint on stage, passing it around the club at the Public Theater, and no one's had any problem with it. Patti LuPone was shotgunning somebody on Saturday.
Wait, go deeper on that. Patti LuPone was shotgunning with somebody on Saturday at Joe's Pub?
Yeah, Amber and I did a show, and she's friends of both of us. We've actually been on close tours in Australia, and so we know each other quite well. It's like she's also moving into a new stage too. She gave up her equity card. She's sort of tired of theater. And I'm like, you need to sing some rock and roll. And she's like, I've never done that, but I love it. And so we're going to try to get her up there. I was just started smoking during, I think, Amber's Rhiannon or something, and the joint disappeared. And suddenly people are laughing over there, and she's shotgunning with somebody. So it was like, she's like, I haven't been high in 30 years, John. I'm totally high. And I'm like, so am I. And our vibe is the best of the 70s and early 80s, minus the AIDS, minus the violence, minus the white male supremacy. It's like we have a way of thinking that can only really be fully executed with people in a room.
I love Julius, and I would say it's mostly men in there. I love it because I think it's what cubbyhole should be. Like, you can actually sit down, you can order food, you can order drinks. Like, it has a much more relaxed, you could spend hours in there and not sort of feel any pain in the way that you feel the pain in cubbyhole because it's so suffocating to be in there. With the parties, what's your take on sort of mixing like men and women, as far as, because there is so much separatism with gay men and gay women. I like that you kind of bring them together.
Yeah, I mean, in other less large metropolises, the queer people gather more naturally together in an eclectic way. I remember when I was young going to Anchorage, Alaska, there was one main gay bar. Every queer person was there, and it was very warm. And you don't get any of that annoying misogyny from gay men or misanthropy from gay women. And I think the trans movement and non-binary movement have helped that in some ways, opened up other tensions with as well. Mm-hmm. What do you think of, like, say, old school lesbians, kind of like, well, we made it safe for lesbians, and now these butch dykes want to be the enemy. They want to be the men. And it's like, well, grandma, God bless you, because we all stand upon your shoulders, and you were there for us as gay men during AIDS. You know what I mean? It's like, thank God. That's why nuns were so cool, because most of them were dykes. It was just like they got shit done. But at the same time, we're always second class and third class. And so to actually identify, the trans movement as a betrayal is limiting, as opposed to its personal journey. And yes, there is peer pressure, there is societal pressure, there's family pressure, there's your buddies saying, we're all transitioning, you should too, which is not exactly the way you want to be making decisions, is just because everyone else is doing it. My mom told me, jump off a cliff. But it's not a linear process. It's sometimes back and forth, and sometimes it involves medical science, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe it just involves changing a name. It's like, or a pronoun. I'm too old. In effect, I'm non-binary. I think in some ways we all are. I don't like the word because it's negative, and defining someone by what they're not is not particularly useful. There's also a desire to be diagnosed. Mm-hmm. I can't wait for my diagnosis.
Yeah.
So I can explain why I don't want to leave the house. I'm having self-care. It's like, yeah, but it was the day of your final exam. Yeah, but I was watching Shrill, all 3 episodes. I'm like, is that really self-care right now? Or is it avoidance? That's a delicate thing. That's personal.
What year did you move to New York City?
I came in 85. I got a job out of college at Northwestern in Chicago as the understudy for Huck Finn in the Broadway musical Big River. So it was an amazing opportunity. I mean, it was a weird experience because they didn't treat the understudies very well, but I was very happy to be there. At that time, the Actors Equity Board would have sublets, and you go there, and that's how you find a place to live. I lived for sublets for a while, and met this painter, and lived in the living room while she was in the bedroom, and we didn't even know each other were gay. It was so hilarious, and she's like, you listen to all this blues and rock, and I didn't think you were gay. And I'm like, well, you didn't, and I didn't think you were gay.
I want to talk about your apartment.
Yeah.
Because I know that you are one of the rare lucky few that have a rent stabilized apartment here in the Village. Tell me the story of your West Village apartment.
Well, I was subletting around, and then I finally was working more, and I moved. Went to a broker. I liked being downtown. This was 93. So there was a bit of a recession in the early 90s, right when Bush was out and on his way out, the first Bush, and Clinton was coming in. And there was also a kind of excitement about, there was almost a new gay movement. It was coming out of AIDS and a demand for respect. And it was almost cool to be gay. If you remember when Clinton came in, it was Clinton and Gore, heads superimposed on gym gay bodies. And, it was like there was this, here comes the gays. So AIDS was in the air still. It was very harsh. There was anti-gay violence, even in the Village, people screaming at you, throwing things coming out of Jersey. But I found this place where I am now, 11th Street, 7th Avenue. And I found out I was directly above a 24-hour Greek diner kitchen with a vibrating fan under my bed that would start and stop every 10 minutes, and it would jerk the bed. And I was like, oh my God, I paid a broker's fee. And I said, can I get my money back? And they're like, no. And I created a suspension system, for my bed, on these pads to keep it from vibrating. The lady who owned the building, this wouldn't happen anymore, actually came, saw what was happening, and reduced my rent a little bit, which doesn't happen either, right, anymore. She passed on. Now a billionaire owns it. And then the Greek diner moved on, and now it's soundproof and it's totally fine. But I can't do much with it. I still have crappy cabinets and floors, and you're not really supposed to do anything, without them raising the rent. You're supposed to do major work. They're supposed to do the work when it's wearing out, but they do horrible work. So I was like, I'd like to do the work, but then you have to negotiate with them, that whole deal. So I haven't done much here in the 30 years I've been here, but thank God I've been here. And two of my best collaborators, Amber Martin and Michael Cavadias, who does a great character called Clay Woman, when we wrote Cancellation Island together, we were all downtown, long-time rent stabilized people, and they'd been on various lists. So Amber just got Manhattan Plaza.
Oh, wow.
Artist residence in Hell's Kitchen, has been there forever. And 15 years, I think she was on the list. And she finally got something there, which is tied to your income. And she pays $300 a month for a lovely large studio. And Michael Cavadias got a place in another, one of those high rises that has affordable housing. And he's got a 1-bedroom for $900 downtown. So it's like we paid our dues. We lucked out with the rent stabilized, but they lucked out again. And now I've mostly moved to New Orleans. This is really more my pied-à-terre now.
Yeah, so this is actually where you and I collide. So I'm a fellow New Yorker. I've lived here my entire life, and New Orleans was always my favorite city to visit in the United States. And the past few winters, I've been going down there and staying for like 2-3 months at a time, and it really has become my second home outside of New York. If we can talk about the magic of the Marigny and the Bywater, and there's a feeling there. It's one of the few cities, I think, that still has its soul.
Totally. That's why I'm there. And I just started going maybe 10 or 12 years ago, once in a while. Started making more friends there. More friends from here were moving, from San Francisco, from LA, from Portland. We're finding that those cities had lost a bit of their soul, mostly because of money. And it was very not welcoming to artists and young people. They had to spend all their money on rent. And New Orleans certainly has more expensive areas, but it's possible to live there more reasonably. And the culture of art and creativity is endemic. It's deeply ingrained. It's a city in drag, and you can wear whatever you want. They have this new governor now in Louisiana who's probably going to try to ban drag in public. But you can just imagine New Orleans. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
That's the funniest thing I've ever heard. New Orleans is a city in drag.
It is. The house I live in the Bywater, which I bought from an occult church, is one of those beautiful, colorful, painted ladies, as they call the old Victorians. And there's the Garden District, which is more graceful mansions with columns. There's the Bywater, the Marigny, the Seventh Ward, which are more shotguns and oddly shaped places. And there's still a feeling of people trying to make things happen there and do it organically rather than digitally, or not necessarily looking for a big paycheck or like fame or something. It's just like, let's make our thing, whether it's making our puppets or our music, or I have a ballroom in my space that has a stage. So I'm going to be having all kinds of events and art, and hopefully raise some money to make it an artist residence as well. I'm going to have to rent it too, sadly, but I've made it into a kind of Art Nouveau, crazy punk rock haven. And it comes from this occult church called the OTO that had its own creative, neighborhood vibe. And people always spoke well of them, and they would have all kinds of stuff in the venue. So it's continuing the tradition of New Orleans, but adding a bit of New York to it. So New York and New Orleans have always had a connection, maybe in the way that, say, Provincetown in New York. And now I know people, Provincetown and New Orleans have a connection. I know people who live in both places.
Can I just tell you, my dream is to rotate between P-Town, New York City, New Orleans, and Fire Island throughout the year.
Yeah, if I could just be hanging out in Provincetown, New York, and New Orleans most of the year, I would be extremely happy. In New York, you're more like surviving the city and getting what you can, and like getting over. Whereas New Orleans, at worst, it's like you're drunk all the time. At best, you're creating events, you're creating environments. They don't allow corporate logos and all the wonderful parades. It's like there's an inertia, but also a resistance to change, which sometimes can be great in terms of tradition. It's not always good when it comes to city services and people taking care of.
But there also is like no infrastructure. Like the roads are like, you can't really. It's magical, but also like we need like some like roads we can drive on. But that's
it's a Caribbean nation, and it in many ways, but it has a lot more resources than, say, Puerto Rico, another part of our country.
From what I understand, this is the first home you've ever owned. Was your fantasy to eventually buy a place in New York, and just New Orleans became the possibility?
I think way back I was like, I'd love to have a townhouse, but of course that became impossible, many years ago, without being a multimillionaire. So I guess, other friends were getting places in upstate or Long Island or Jersey or Delaware or something, and Pennsylvania, Delaware, Water Gap. And it was like, oh, these are lovely little cottages. But they also tended to be people who were in couples or relationships. And like, I don't want to move out to the country by myself. It's just too weird. I want a community. And in fact, New York, I have my wider community, but not necessarily neighborly community. There was like, wow, I think I want to be in a neighborhood, not an isolated castle somewhere or a cabin somewhere. I want to be on a street, and I want to see my neighbors, and I want to say hey and help each other out and do parties together. And that's what this is. That's why I'm there. And I'd rather be there than, say, Portland, which is another lovely city, but the attitude is more reserved and more kind of, cloudy weather, northern stuff. New Orleans, there's much more of a, hey baby, what's up? Where you at? It's much more casual, friendly. It's a city that it feels like a small town. It's what do you got to bring to the party rather than where you're from, because there's always a party, and that's the only thing that gets anything done is calling it a party. No one ever finishes anything till the party.
Yeah.
Generally, the people I know are contributing in some way to something there, and that is important to me for me to do. I'm 60 now. I wasn't even going to spend money on this house, but my decorator's like, this is your dream house, babe. This is your death house. I'm like, what? Well, this may be where you die. You mean that may be your deathbed? I was like, is that my death couch? The death TV? He's like, you better think about it that way. What do you want around you?
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm broke because I spent it all. So now I have to face the horrors of maybe having to rent it to some of those millionaires to sustain it. But I think I can target that and then keep it going.
I first saw Hedwig when I was 20, right after I had first seen Rocky Horror. And those two projects, I think, really changed my life. In addition to Rent, but I had seen Hedwig prior. The music had a huge impact on my life. I think in a way it really helped solidify the type of queer adult I would become, in that I do feel like I don't fit in. I much more identify with the gay male experience for whatever reason. Like, that's where my interests lie. And I just always love the punk rock nature of all three of those projects. I think the most misunderstood thing about Hedwig is that people think it's a trans story when it's not.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I had a minor experience of cancellation in Australia where there was a large production. It was a queer man who was a big star, and he was kind of coming out more, and not always, let's say, at ease, with that. And then a little online petition that got bigger was started by a couple of young people who I guess identified as non-binary trans, saying Hedwig as a trans role must be played by a trans actor, when in effect some of them wanted to play the role, which I understand. There's not that many gender non-conforming roles, but it was very young. Also, they didn't cancel the play because I'm not trans, did they? They just canceled the acting, the casting.
Right.
If you're really going to go all the way, then I'm not trans. It's a trans story. I'm not allowed to tell it, which I'm sure somebody believes somewhere. I would say to them, this is a much more complicated, it's more complicated than labels can handle. The character is certainly not me, but is emotionally me. Queer, lost, wandering the world, being fucked with, trying to survive through art, rock and roll, in her case, drag. So it's a boy who seemed to be quite happy with their gender, or at least was a femme boy who's, got this boyfriend, an American GI, and he seems to like her to dress him at that time, Hansel, to dress up as a girl at times. So it's like, okay, what do you want? Tell me what to be, and there was a power imbalance. The soldier certainly had power and was free, and Hansel was in East Germany, trapped in a non-queer place, listening to American rock and roll on TV. So when that boyfriend says, I want to take you away, I want to marry you, but won't they know that it's a physical examination, that they get married? And he said, well, baby, to walk away, you got to leave something behind. To be free, one must give up a little part of oneself. And even mother says that. And suddenly the government, the boyfriend, the mother are all like, do you really need that thing dangling between your legs? Because that defines man and woman. So to me, it's really a story of what the fucking patriarchy can do to you in its arrogance, defining what man and woman is. And then that accomplice, called Hedwig's husband, walks away with another boy, probably to do the same thing to him. You love me, you change. What the fuck do I do? And Wig in a Box is that moment.
Yep. And
you take what you have in the room. Oh, there's a wig, there's some makeup. I'm just going to try to make myself feel better. And I'm like starting to feel something. So it's about self-creation. It's about defending yourself against the tribulations of the world with armor called drag, and creativity called rock and roll in this case.
Suddenly I
And she slash he, whatever you want to call them, is saved by that. It's a life buoy, right? She's wearing a life jacket called drag. So
I
it's
love
like,
that you're just giving the total plot of Hedwig.
well, wait, that's what I'm trying to explain.
Yeah.
It's, trans means crossing over, and there was crossing over going on. But to say that the character had any volition and agency in their gender transition is a false one.
Yeah.
So when these people in effect canceled the casting, the famous actor got into kind of DM wars, probably a mistake, personal. There's a whole 60 Minutes Australia episode about it, which is not very, it's not deep enough, but it's at least sympathetic to him. And I had to come out and say some of these things. And this is a trans story. My trans friends don't see it as a trans story, yet they see value in it because of the metaphor of the origin of love. That we have these male and female energies that we can move around, and sometimes they define us and sometimes we define them. So everyone I know understands that this piece is complex. A couple of young people are like, you're presenting transness as traumatic, and I was like, I'm talking about this character. The character never says they're trans. So in effect, it's about drag, really. And it's like saving you, and then you let go of it. At the end, she drops it and says, I'm a gender of one, in effect. So this is useful to people, all kinds of people. We've never had one kind of an audience, because everyone can relate to feeling different and trying to figure out who they are and what they need to be loved.
As far as the work of getting this piece made and put on stage, it started as an off-Broadway show, then it became a movie, then it was revived on Broadway. I actually saw you in the revival, but many people have played Hedwig. Neil Patrick Harris, Andrew Rannells, Taye Diggs.
Drag is for everybody. It's a fairy tale. That's what it has in common with Rocky Horror, which is a much more campy thing.
Yeah.
But it's a fairy tale. Anyone can play a Frankenfurter, and does.
Yes. Take me back to the time when you were staging it off Broadway. I know that you did it. You had to kind of create your own theater or your own staging in what is now the Jane Hotel. At first, it was kind of a flop. At first, it wasn't like this huge success.
Wasn't selling.
What was the moment that you felt like, we may have a hit on our hands? When did the tide begin to turn?
It was never really a hit financially. And there's different kinds of hits, right? There's critical hit, financial hit, it's but we barely hung on for a couple of years off Broadway. It was a small theater, 260. And we kept the overhead low, and it survived, but it was never huge. It was never impossible to get a ticket. But people who didn't like musicals started coming, and coming a lot, and celebrities started coming. And in effect, it became a success d'estime, which in French means, yeah, but can you eat it? So it's I never made my money with Hedwig until I was on Broadway. I would do other things for money, other acting and sometimes writing and directing. But it was like Hedwig, always barely surviving. But it was interesting enough to be loved by the right people. It wasn't Friends where you got people who loved it who you don't like. The people who like Hedwig, I generally really like. Being famous for something you're not that proud of is a recipe for disaster, And this was always something that, a couple people a day might give a wink because they respected it rather than they had to have a selfie with me to control, like I'm a product, right? It was like a relationship with our audience. And I never tried to monetize it much. I didn't do a crazy merch situation. I don't know how to work that way. I'm sure, Rocky Horror, Richard O'Brien, Rocky Horror did that perfectly, in terms of, but it's also, he made it kind of his main job. At a certain point, I don't know if he was always creating, he was managing.
I remember in 2001 when the movie came out, you were on the Rosie O'Donnell show, and she would later talk about how they had to fight to air a clip of the film on the Rosie O'Donnell show. What was the conversation? Like, were you privy to those conversations?
It wasn't a clip. That wasn't the issue. The first time we were on was when we were off Broadway. And she was obviously a big theater fan and a bit in the closet, but always interested in queer theater too. You know, she produced Taboo, you know, about Boy George.
Yes.
And so she loved Hedwig. Again, like I said, we had tons of famous people and people we loved showing up. Lou Reed, Iggy Pop. It was just rife, you know, Broadway legends as well as rock and roll legends. And we couldn't believe it. So she wanted us on. They were the only people who really first wanted us on. And it was a daytime show. And the way she put it is that her studio was saying, we can't have a drag queen on daytime television. It's inappropriate. There's kids watching, whatever. And she's like, what are you talking about? You've got trans people and drag queens on Jerry Springer throwing chairs at each other. Mm-hmm. How about a drag queen singing about love? And they backed down. And she had us on, created a little set for us, and we did Origin of Love live. And she was wearing her Jets jersey and gave me a hug after, and we ended up putting that in the movie, like when Hedwig becomes famous. And she had us on again when the film came out, and we sang with the Little Town, with members of Stone Temple Pilots, of all things.
In the critically acclaimed off-Broadway show Hedwig and the Angry Inch. It's the story of a young man who received a botched sex change operation, becomes a rock star, and sings about how we all start off as one and are split into two and spend the rest of our lives in search of the person who makes us whole again. Here's singing The Origin of Love, John Cameron Mitchell.
Clouds made of fire, the mountains stretched up to the sky, sometimes higher. Folks roamed the earth like big rolling kegs. They had two sets of arms, they had two sets of legs, they had two faces peering out of one giant head, so they could watch all around them as they talked while they read, and they never.
It was fine. And then David Letterman had us on, but that was weird because
please tell this story with the wig.
Yeah, it was like that was much more hands off and less cozy, probably because straight guys involved. But we were rehearsing and I ripped off the wig in the last beat, which is an old drag thing, you know, from 100 years ago. Like, look at me, you know, I'm a man, I'm a woman, whatever. And we rehearsed, and then from the booth, we heard a disembodied voice saying, could you please not take off the wig during the song? And I'm like, first of all, where are you and why? Pause. Could you please just not take off the wig during the song? And I realized they wanted people to think it was a woman and not panic and send them messages, whatever. So I did the song and ripped the wig off after the song rather than on the last beat. And they cut it out. And David always would come down, you know, and shake the hands of the band and stuff. He didn't come down, which I'd never seen before. So that's what happened in that world, you know. But then we would do, you know, later when we had a big push for the soundtrack, you know, Atlantic Records had a big push, you know, we would be on MTV, you know, live shows, Kurt Loder, whatever. But it wasn't, you know, we just weren't meant for the mainstream. It just wasn't going to happen. Even though it was the 90s and there was a kind of rock and roll resurgence, we were still always underground.
You know, I'm a huge fan of Jinx Monsoon, and I know that Jinx studied and performed Hedwig for her senior thesis in college.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I knew that she had played it.
No, she studied and performed it for the senior thesis in college.
Well, I think of Jinx as head and shoulders above the other drag race stars.
Agree.
Many of whom are brilliant because she's got the chops of an old school performer and a new school performer. You know, she's got that timing down. You know, she does these shows that, you know, are kind of steeped in the 20s and 30s, the Fanny Bryces and the Gertrude Lawrences and Beatrice Lillys, people don't know anymore. but were versions. She's a version of, with her own very special individuality. And thank God it's been respected, and she's the queen of all queens, and she's working all over the place. I just worship her. So many wonderful performers today that still rock my world, like Justin Vivian Bond, Jinx Monsoon, Michael Cavadias as Clay Woman, Christine, the rock and roll drag queen, Amber Martin. We come from what, in effect, we called a downtown cabaret scene. Mm-hmm. And Hedwig came out of that too. We Squeezebox, which was the rock and roll drag club, Fez, which was in Westbeth, which were the two rock cabaret spaces, which are now gone and kind of replaced by Joe's Pub mostly. And of course, Joe's Pub, which has been a birthing place and a nurturing place for many, many years at the Public Theater, indispensable.
When you flash forward post Hedwig, pre-revival, but post Hedwig, Shortbus I actually saw in the theater. And I know it was inspired by parties that you were part of. And I heard you say that there was a recent screening of it, and you were sort of saying how the young people loved it, but they were certain that there was something that they should cancel about it.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, what was the reaction at a recent screening of Shortbus?
Well, it was interesting because, when it came out, it was the last couple of years of the independent film boom, before the financial collapse. So there was spaces for it in theaters. And yeah, when Shortbus first came out, it didn't make a lot of waves, but actually a good number of people saw it. The theater DVD was bigger, as it was for Hedwig. And now we don't really have that anymore, which is why one of the reasons independent film is in trouble. People aren't going to the theaters, and they're not necessarily watching them on video. They're waiting for them on streamers, and they forget about them, and they've been lost in the shuffle. So we re-released it with Oscilloscope. They did a great job. Hedwig also came out on Criterion, so both of them did 4K, nice packages, extras, and all that. And we reopened at the IFC and had a lovely few screenings and some Q&As after. And it was interesting because the older people who had seen it before were more moved. The sex was whatever at that point, and they suddenly saw everything else, that they were feeling. And also a certain New York that has gone away. And then the young people were exhilarated by it and really loved it, but they've been taught to look for flaws and trouble, and if it's from the past, it's problematic. It might feel dated or have, some flawed judgment, but it's fantastic.
Yeah, like Sex in the City.
Yeah, and when you do the new ones, they're trying to fix all the ills of the world. And, that's since Trump came in, a lot of young people are like, what can we do? This nightmare on top of us, and what can we do now to fix everything really fast?
What were the problems that they found in Shortbus? Where were they coming for you?
Two examples is a question one after another. So one said, and again, it's like I can hear them being taught a way of thinking and saying it without exactly thinking it through or knowing what it means. So one said, I really loved it, but the lead, an Asian woman trying to find her orgasm, is that your story to tell? I'm like, yeah. It is. Because fiction is not autobiography. And Sookie Lee and I created this character together from elements of her life and elements of my life. And they hadn't really heard it that way. Because I said, if you really are going to follow your logic, then no one's allowed to say anything except about themselves and their actual lives. And you're never allowed to write another character. And do you just want autobiography and memoir with nobody else in it? You can't talk about your mom. It's not your story to tell. If you keep slicing that last piece of dessert, you end up with a tiny molecule of it. Fiction, the point of it is to understand people that aren't us, to put ourselves in the shoes that is someone that isn't us, so we can feel for them and want to live with them and maybe learn something about yourself.
I mean, a perfect example of this, you and Kate McKinnon played the worst people in the world, these survivalist cult leaders in the Joe Exotic series. You played Joe Exotic. How did this, did you audition for this?
I did, and it's funny. It was the first audition I had done in like 20 years because I was out of the acting gig for a while, and then when I started acting again, it was just offers. Lena Dunham was the first one to bring me back in Girls. So that I understood that a little bit of me was like, well, you know who I am. I don't need to audition for this. But Joe Exotic's a very different role. So I want to know if I could do it. And of course I should audition for, because he's so radically different. So I did a self-tape that was really fun. I worked with a filmmaker who had a moving camera, and I really got my makeup together. I did it in London. I was working on Sandman. And I changed stuff around and flashed my butthole at one point. And there was no callback. It was just like, you're in. And the process, the people who made it were lovely. They weren't queer, but they listened to both Kate and I to queer the thing up a little. I kept trying to make it more punk rock. This story can't handle that. No story can.
Right.
And I feel good about what I did, and I had a good time doing it. And nobody saw it. So I ran into someone yesterday who was like, I saw it. I was like, you're the only one.
Do you think nobody saw it because it was on Peacock?
Yeah. And they were tired of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it paid for my house. So I have no problem.
Incredible. I mean, you were also on Shrill, which I loved. You opposite, of course, Adie Bryant and Patty Harrison, who's a performer that I love. How was that experience? Like, did you have to go up to Portland to film that?
Yeah, I didn't have to. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
It was a great place to work. There were only a few productions at a time there, maybe 2 or 3. And so it was very cozy and always a nice place to stay. And Patty and I were roommates for 1 year. It was very fun. I felt like, her gay uncle, and she cracks me up deeply, and has a very dark sense of humor. Very easy job, dream job. I could play a gay villain in a way, which is fun. It's funny, for a few years there was like, we can't have any queer villains because it would be a bad stereotype or something. And it's like, we've come around, there's enough different roles now that the queer villains can exist again, which I enjoy, because that's what's paying for my house. And to go back to the Shortbus thing, the woman who said, is the story you're telling? The next question was a young Latina woman who said, I really loved it, but as a woman of color, there was no one for me to relate to. I mean, forgetting that the lead woman is a woman of color, but she's Colombian. And I was like, okay. And she said, have you considered remaking it with a more diverse cast? I'm like, you know how hard it was to find those people. I opened it up to everybody before I had a story, because I didn't know who would want to do it, and I'd have to build it around them. So, it was a wide open call. And these were the most interesting people, and also people who could be couples. Not everybody was connected, compatible sexually. So I gave everybody a good time in the callbacks, and everyone had a great time during it. There was no negative. No one felt bad about anything. There was no sense of expectation. I was everyone's intimacy counselor. Imagine having intimacy counselors on a Shortbus. I just did Joe Exotic, and it was like the intimacy counselor. May he put his hand on your shoulder? I'm like, because I was imagining Shortbus. May he put his hand inside?
Going back, like pre-Hedwig, how are you inspired to create your own material and not wait to be cast? Like, did you have trouble getting cast? Like, what was the impetus to actually, I'm going to create my own rock musical?
I was working a lot. I could play straight. I could cover a lot of ground. My more femme friends or butch women were like Charles Busch or Margot Gomez or Dale Orlander Smith would make solo pieces because they weren't getting cast, and became wonderful writers from it. I was being cast, but starting to get bored with what I was cast at. I would have some great experiences, 6 Degrees of Separation and The Secret Garden, but after a while, I was going to kind of get bored. So during The Secret Garden, I started thinking about something new and was doing TV to pay the bills, and then Hedwig would be where I would spend the money, that I made elsewhere. And before the internet, every person's address to send a flyer to, you earned every one of those people that personal connection, and they would get things mailed to them. And so I Stephen Trask and I built our audiences one by one until there was in the theater and more people could come, and then the film made its own way.
You brought it up earlier. So many people are rewatching Girls now. They're starting from the beginning, and you famously played Hannah's book editor. You were in like 5 episodes. How is and you just mentioned Lena Dunham just found you and cast you?
Yeah, I had gone to a premiere the first season and met her there, like at Boom Boom Room of the Standard or something, which was a place people would have their hip openings. And she was a fan of me and Hedwig. And in some ways, Shortbus informed it, right, in terms of its tone, sexuality and comedy, and definitely in the same world, Brooklyn and New York. And we exchanged numbers, and she just texted, "Do you want to play my book editor?" And I was nervous. I hadn't really acted in about 10 or 12 years, and by choice. And I was like, "Can I see the script?" And I looked at it. It was like pretty good. I was like, "Can I rewrite some stuff?"
Yeah.
She's like, "Sure." So they moved so fast, and I didn't really know. And I came in with a completely rewritten, scene, and she didn't panic when she looked at it. She's like, "That's good, though. I think we should keep what I had there for that point, but I love this new stuff." And she was for a young person, very good at editing quickly in the script mode. And I was really nervous, and she calmed me down, at whatever, mid-20s, and I was in my mid-40s, and it was a complete pleasure. So after that first scene, I relaxed, and I would punch up the scenes. And every time I had a gig after that in another show, I would do the same, ask respectfully, like I was on The Good Fight, and they would let me rewrite, suggest stuff. And later, Lena said, the only person I let rewrite was you and my mom. So I really love her, and she got me back on the performing track, which I very much enjoyed. But it was funny to be the old guy. I remember Adam Driver in one scene saying, "It's very nice to meet you, sir." I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm the older guy now." And then she would take my advice. We had a kind of a slightly expositional scene that didn't have a lot of juice. And I'm like, "What if I'm on Grindr the whole time? And we can comment on that." She's like, "What is that exactly?" So we did that, and she, to explain to our viewers, "What is that?" And I'm like, "Well, it's a GPS thing." "Oh my God, I had no idea we were so close to a seminary." And so she cut that joke. But she's that kind of person.
It's funny what you're saying about the rewriting, because I know in Hedwig there are sections where the performer, it's in the script that they can improvise, like the city they're in, they can improvise. Like I actually saw you when you had the boot, you had like fallen and like hurt your leg or your foot. You were doing bits out of the boot, and it seems like a lot of performers have the freedom to kind of ad-lib.
Yeah. I mean, I come from very stringent theater, so I craved spontaneity and some improvisational stuff. And Hedwig is really a plea to get the energy that I would see in a rock show that was very spontaneous and felt more immediate than theater, but didn't have theater's structure and narrative power. So putting those two things together, there's rock musicals like Tommy, but there's still no story. Ziggy Stardust has a vague kind of characters, but not really a story.
Final question. Is it true that you were offered the role of Angel in Rent, despite it being clearly a Puerto Rican character?
Yes.
How did that work?
I do have a shack in Puerto Rico, but I don't know if that makes me a Puerto Rican.
How did that work? Like, if the character is written as a Puerto Rican, how does John Cameron Mitchell get offered the role? Was this the original role?
Yeah, and it was very flattering, but even then, when people weren't necessarily as stringent about, those kind of things, casting wise, and sometimes you can get over stringent. Like, I remember people complaining that the lead in the new West Side Story wasn't Puerto Rican. He was Colombian. I'm like, guys, these are Caribbean. There's a lot of things in common here, more in common than not. Let's not get carried. You could start saying, well, she's not Puerto Rican living in San Juan. You could keep splitting the hairs. Yeah. But for something like Rent, it was weird. It was like, thank you so much, but I don't feel qualified to play this unless it wasn't that great a role. be honest. I never quite understood what was going on. Why is she dressed in the Santa outfit? Is she trans? Is she in drag? Or, I think he was creating a kind of, I wouldn't say token character, but emblematic without going deep enough. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but Angel is a drag queen.
Angel is a drag queen, but is always in drag. Which is not
No. When they sing "I'll Cover You," or in the reprise of "I'll Cover You," Angel's out of drag.
Okay, good. Then I don't know Rent that well.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I always respected Rent, but didn't like it. I loved its heart, but I didn't like its clothes, if you know what I'm saying. I didn't buy it. Certainly wasn't like, it was supposed to be like downtown 90s, East Village. I'm like, I don't know anyone like that.
You know what's so funny? I'm a Rent head, right? And so like a few years ago, I interviewed Rosie O'Donnell and I was talking to her about Rent, and she said the very same thing. She's like, I'm like, really? I'm like, Rosie, you're breaking my heart. Like, I thought that you were like loved Rent. She's like, not really.
I also, I feel like he probably needs to do a bit more work, famously dying.
Yeah.
And I think it wasn't fully thought through. He was about to start previews where you do some changes, and some changes never happen. Part of it is also like intelligibility. I couldn't always hear what people were singing, lost the story. But that said, I think it's had more positive effect than maybe any musical, modern musical for sure. More than Hedwig, because more people saw it, and it's big. It's a bigger thing. So it's like, to me, it's like a vital thing, a very vital thing. But aesthetically, I couldn't quite find my way in. Though, and the one song that I always related to was the Dyke Lovers song, whatever it's called.
Take Me or Leave Me.
Yes, Take Me for What I Am.
Yeah, the best.
Beautiful. And interestingly, I thought they wanted me for the narrator Mark character.
Yeah.
When they were saying they wanted to cast me, and then I was like, I don't think so.
You would have made a great Mark.
Well, interestingly enough, those are the songs that I related to the least. The character I related to. But I hated that one big song, The Millennium, whatever it's called.
Oh, I think you're talking about What You Own. That is a strange song.
His giant song, right?
Yeah. The name of it
rubbed me the wrong way. And then, interestingly, later, after Hedwig, Spike Lee was going to direct it. And he called me because I had done a small part in one of his films. And he said, John, I'd like you to play Mark in the film. And I'm like, I'm so flattered, Spike. But I must decline. I just don't relate to the character, and it doesn't always ring true. I mean, I'd like to know what you would do with it, and I would much rather have seen that than the film that did come out, because he knows New York and he knows more that scene, and he's a musical fan, and he made a great. It was really more of a shooting the play of Passing Strange, which is a musical. I felt much more the feelings that I wanted to feel in Passing Strange than Rent, because they do deal with some of the some things, not AIDS and certain things, but this aesthetic was closer to the music was better for me, you know what I mean? And so when Yitzhak in the film wants to be in Rent to play Angel, which is the character I was offered, is definitely a nod to that. And also its popularity. They're playing in Guam. I'm leaving,
Oh my God. This has been a real unexpected hit piece on Rent. John Cameron Mitchell, this has been so fun. Thank you.
Very fun.
Thank you so much. This is amazing.
You're welcome. No problem. You take care, babe.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.